Hi, welcome to God in the MCU, a video series where we wonder together about the presence and movement of God through the most successful movie series of all time. This is the final episode of a 3-part series where we're talking about Avengers Endgame. As always, thanks for watching and enjoy episode 4, part 3, Beginnings and Endgames. Let's talk about time. Now, this video isn't long enough to explain how time travel functions in the plot of Endgame.
Time travel!
But I do want to talk about how it furthers the character development. The movie uses time travel as the primary way that the heroes confront their issues, which we already talked about in part 1. But I want to focus on Iron Man and Captain America, because they have always had interesting relationships with time. Tony Stark has always been a man about the future.
The futurist, gentlemen! The futurist is here! He sees all. He knows what's best for you, whether you like it or not.
His technology has always been on the cutting edge, leading the world into the future. He also has, since the first Avengers movie, had a terrible fear of the future.
And I'm the man who killed the Avengers. I did do all I could.
Maximoff girl, she's working you, Stark. Playing on your fear.
I wasn't tricked, I was shown. It wasn't a nightmare, it was my legacy. The end of the path I started us on.
It's perhaps the case that Tony feels so propelled into the future because his pain comes from the past. His trauma from the attack on New York, and the lack of closure he had with his father. Tony Stark is a man of the future, stuck in the past. Captain America, on the other hand, is a man of the past, stuck in the future. He was snatched from the past into a future he doesn't understand.
A man out of time.
His values are old-fashioned, and he can never seem to reconcile them in this new future. He doesn't even know what he wants out of life, or what a future for himself could look like.
I don't know. Family, stability. Guy who wanted all that went in the ice 75 years ago. I think someone else came out.
It's no surprise then where we find these two at the beginning of Endgame. Even after 5 years, Cap is stuck in this future that he can't make sense of. And Iron Man has found a future that he can't afford to lose. In order for each of them to finally complete their journeys, they have to meet in the middle, learning from one another. Tony ends his journey after fully entering and reconciling with the past. Cap ends his journey by taking Tony's advice and getting a life, by going back to his own time and building a future of his own. The futurist finds redemption by being willing to reconfront the past, and the man out of time finds redemption by being willing to create a future. Now, perhaps this is confusing and not really relatable. After all, time travel is not an option for us. Nevertheless, Christians who take seriously the story of the Bible, which contains both the beginning and end of all things, find themselves in a complicated relationship to time. We find ourselves sitting somewhere in the middle of time, anticipating the future God promises, learning from the past, but also reconciling with the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus that has profound implications on both. One of the most significant theological concepts to find language in the last 100 years is an understanding of the now and not yet reign of God. One of the first and most influential communicators of this idea was a theologian named George Eldon Ladd. Ladd pointed out that there are all kinds of ways to conceive of the relationship of the beginning and end to the now. In his Theology of the New Testament, he shows several diagrams that catalog the development of this theology. Originally, when the Israelites were expecting a Messiah, they thought this was how it would work. The Messiah would come, and the present age would end and the new one would begin. For those who believe Jesus is the Messiah, however, this presents a problem. That Jesus ascended into heaven, and the reign of God didn't, in all its fullness, all of a sudden begin. What Ladd suggests is a much more complicated diagram, one that seems about as confusing as the time travel of Endgame. Ladd diagrams the reign of God above the present age, but experiencing moments of interaction, perhaps with the Exodus, exile, and other significant events. But with the coming of Jesus, his death and resurrection, the two ages have entered into a new, more dynamic relationship that will ultimately culminate in the merging of these two ages into the reign of God. But in the meantime, Ladd writes, the church lives between the times. The old age goes on, but the powers of the new age have erupted into the old age. So Christians live in a complicated relationship to the present, living within it while being compelled by events of the past that narrate the way we live, but also in hope and active anticipation of the future that has been promised. We are both the ones out of time and the futurists. Very often, our temptation is to lean too far in one of those directions. For many Christians, it's a temptation to be stuck in the future, being so caught up in the idea of Christ's return or in our own personal future in heaven that we neglect the present age, forgetting how many of Jesus' commands are specifically about how we live and love in the present. On the other hand, there are Christians who live too much in the past, clinging to tradition and how their parents and their parents' parents practiced their faith, forgetting that the gospel is living and active, and that the Spirit speaks anew to new people and in new ways. As Christians, we are called to be people of the past, present, and future, all at the same time, attempting, with God's help, to strike the right balance of reconciling and respecting the past without worshiping it, and anticipating and living into the future without being escapist. So those of us who find ourselves stuck in the past need to learn the lesson of Captain America and take stock of the present moment and imagine a new future. Those of us who find ourselves obsessed with the future need to learn the lesson of Iron Man and risk embracing the past and the present in all its pain and brokenness. That way, we too can learn a lot from the truth that Tony learned from his father and passes back to him, that no amount of money ever bought a second of time.